Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 5 of my Inkscape video tutorial. Today we're going to talk about some really interesting tools. We're going to talk about cloning and clone tiling, which is really cool. If you missed any of the previous parts of the tutorial, you don't have to watch them if you're just interested in this subject. But if you'd like to take a look, they are available in the upper right-hand corner of this video and also in the description for this video. So I have a lot to do, so let's get into it. So now I'm going to demonstrate cloning first because it's pretty simple. And I just hit star and I'm going to draw a star shape here on our screen. And now that I have that selected, I'm going to go over into edit and come down here where it says clone. And if you can't see this, view it full screen, it's an HD video. And I'm going to click on create clone. Now the clone's going to be on top. And if I would say switch over into the node tool, and actually what I'm going to do with this guy is I'm going to convert this to path. So go path, object to path. And there we go. And grab this node, and there you can see it automatically changed the clone. Something else that's kind of neat about this is, let's say I select this clone and create a clone of a clone. What's going to happen? So just go clone, create clone. There we go. And we have a new clone. Now if we come in here and change this clone, that's going to change, but the original will not. And also, if I would say come in here to this clone and change it, both of those are going to change because this is a clone of this and this is a clone of that. And then of course I can come in here and detach them so that they no longer affect each other by clicking on edit, coming down here, clone, unlink clone. And now we'll be able to come in here and change this clone without affecting the other ones. So that's the basics of what you do with clones. So now let's take a look at something a little bit more cool, clone tiling. Alright, so to demonstrate clone tiling, basically what it does is it just repeats an object in numerous different ways across the screen. So let's say I create a rectangle. So I'm going to draw a rectangle inside of here, or a square, or whatever I want. There we go. And let's move it over here. Then we're going to go into Edit and Clone and create tiled clones. Now this starts off really simple, but it gets really crazy very quickly. So I have that selected. Let's just do something really simple. So I have one row and 3 columns and hit create, and there you can see. Not that exciting. However, there are numerous other different things you can do, and to remove that styling, just click on remove. Now we can come in here to this guy, and let's say, well, let's close this. We want to draw some ellipses in here so we can track exactly what's going on. So we got that, and let's give that a white space. And also let's come in here and just make copies of this dot. So put one there and then put another one down there. It looks like a die. Okay, and then we'll come in and give this a fill color of yellow and give this a fill color of cyan and then give this a fill color of, I don't know, neon. Well, I already got neon green. Let's try red instead. Alright, so now I have those selected. I'm going to hit Control G to group, something I've covered before. And then again, edit, come down to clone, and then create tiled clones. There we go. Simple translation we already saw. So let's try something different. And let's look at all of them all at the same time here. So basically, simple translation is just going to make as many duplicates across how many rows and how many columns you define. P2 through CM are going to rotate the tiles as they're being generated 180 degrees, and then also flip them both horizontally and vertically. P4 as well as P4M and P4G are going to rotate 90 degrees, which is going to give you sort of the impression that you are creating tiles in square shapes. P3 through P3M1 are going to create 120 degree rotations as well as reflections if you'd like that, which are going to create sort of triangular patterns. And then P6 and P6M are going to rotate 60 degrees, which is going to create hexagonal type patterns. Alright, so we have those set up. Let's just change it to 180 degree rotation and hit, well, let's come in here also, make this 3 rows and 3 columns and hit create. And there you can see the white went down here 180 degrees and then back where it was. And you can see that it is also using the same tile in the first row for each one of these, and then since everything's rotating 180 degrees, it's also going to keep everything else aligned. We can come in here again and let's try reflection, hit create. Now you can see the yellow, the red, the white, the blue, all line up. But you can also see that we are also using the same tile in each beginning row. Glide reflection is going to change that a little bit. What it's going to do is flip the white down there, and you can see how this is all changing. And this is really something that you would play with on your own. Now to also look at this in a completely different way, we're going to close this and we're going to delete this. And I'm going to draw sort of an irregular type of shape because I found drawing irregular type of shapes with this tool makes it a little bit easy to demonstrate exactly how it's working. So there we go. I drew sort of like a bean type shape inside of there. Let's shrink that down a little bit so that we'll be able to see it a little bit better. Then if I want to change the stroke, I actually don't think I've ever shown you this before. Just come down here at the very bottom where it says stroke and right click. And then we can come up here and say we want to change the stroke to 6. See, now the bean shape's a little bit easier to see. And again, we're going to go into Edit and Clone and Create Tiled Clones. And there you can see, of course, Symmetry or simple translation is going to keep everything nice and even. Same exact thing over and over again. 180 degrees. There you can see how they're flipped. So it's a little bit easier to see exactly what's going on with these patterns whenever we use irregular shapes. Glide, and then let's go down into the 90-degree rotation and hit create. See how we're sort of, well, actually I need to change these to 4 to make sure that you can see how they are sort of square-shaped patterns. Create. See, square-shaped patterns are being formed whenever you have 90 degrees. And it's kind of hard to see whenever we switch to 120 degrees that these sort of have a triangular type of pattern, but sort of get that gist just from looking at it. Now let's change it to 60-degree rotation, hit create, and you can see those patterns that are generated there. So they're all kind of interesting, but whenever we get into shift and scale and all these other things, you're going to see some really cool things happen. And let's just demonstrate one of those right now. And let's say that I want to draw a diamond type shape. So come in with the star, come over here, click on Polygon, let that be 4, and let's just hold down the control key so everything lines up here, and then shift over to the select tool, and let's make this width 90 pixels, and I'm just changing this up here, and let's make our height for our diamond shape 150 pixels. So there, we got that right there. And if we want to come in and also change, edit, clone, create tiled clones, there we go. Of course, we can do very simple things like the simple translation, or the P1 as it's referred to all the time. Hit create, and there you can see how those patterns are generated. We can also come in and do some more interesting things. And one thing to remember with this, there's almost every single time you're going to get frustrated using the Tiled Clones tool. It's going to be based off of the fact that you set something inside of here in one of these tabs and you don't remember which one. That's why it's always a good idea to go reset. And anytime you're really struggling, you can't figure out why things aren't rotating or aren't doing what you expect them to do, just come in here and reset all these and then try again. Chances are there's something that's been set and you just don't remember it. And reset. Now all of them are reset, so that's good. Again, unclump, what that's going to do is, if you have a whole bunch of random patterns, what it's going to try to do is sort of make the distance between these objects in these patterns that you're creating look a little better, like so that they're not all clumped together, hence the name unclump. And remove, of course, like I said, is going to remove the tiled clone changes that you made. Something that's kind of neat. Let's jump inside of here and let's change this to 120 degree rotation. There you go, and hit create. There you can see patterns are starting to form on the screen, so that's kind of neat. And another thing you might want to do is to come in here and change this to a 1 and hit create, and then actually we can come in here and change this to a 3 and hit create. And what I'm referring to are the rows and the columns. And there you can see that I was able to generate this cube shape on the screen really easy actually. So there's numerous different things you can do, and I'm going to explore more as we go on here. Next thing I want to explore is the Shift tab inside of this and how it's going to change the look and feel of everything that we're going to be using here. And I'm going to close this, and instead what I'm going to do is draw an hexagon shape. So like this, there that is. Change the corners on this to 6. There we go. Hold down Control, and there we have our type of hexagon shape. Actually shift this, and then I'm going to rotate it. There we go, that looks a little bit better. And let's look at shift again. So we're just going to go edit, clone, create tiled clones, and here we are again. Let's take a look at shift. Now, remember, we want to change this back to simple translation or hit reset anytime we're trying to create a new design. And basically what shift's going to do is each time a new tile is created, either on a row or on a column, you're going to be able to shift or move those different new tiles in different ways. Normally, whenever you're playing around with the shifts, rows are going to be affected by shift Y in this area. That's where you're going to be making changes. And columns are going to be affected inside of the shift X sort of setting. So for example, let's say I come in here, like I said, shift X is going to be columns most of the time. I mean, play around with it, find what you like. And shift Y is going to be rows. So change that just like that. And then we come in here and hit create. And there you can see that it just created a little bit of space between each of these tiles as they were being drawn on the screen. Then we can look at these different settings. Basically, what alternate's going to do is alternate the sign for the shifts for each new tile that's going to be drawn. And this is going to deal with each row, and this is going to deal with each column. Cumulate is going to sort of grow the shifts. So if you are jumping 10%, well, then the next time it's going to go 20, and it's going to go up and up and up. And again, you can define that for the rows as well as the columns to create many different different shapes and changes. And then exclude tile is basically just going to ignore the tile height, the original tile height, whenever it is shifting all these. And in this situation, it's a little bit confusing. This is going to exclude the tile height, and this is going to exclude the tile width. And then, of course, we can also randomize with this over here, and so forth and so on. What we're going to do is we're going to remove that, and we're going to create something a little bit more interesting. Now, like I said before, Shift-X is normally going to relate to columns and rows, but not always. In this situation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the columns be 0, and I'm going to show you a real quick way to create a whole bunch of really neat patterns using hexagons. So we'll go into Shift-X, and what it's going to do is shift 50%, and then the Shift-Y is going to shift negative 25% as each new tile is being drawn on our screen. We also want to make sure that the symmetry is set for simple translation, which it is, and then we're going to hit create. And you're going to see that the hexagons all grew outwards to make 3 of them. However, if we come in here to the columns part, let's up this a little bit. Let's change this to 6 and this to 6, and hit create. You can see now that we made like a honeycomb sort of pattern on the screen. And we were able to move those all into a very interesting type of pattern on our screen. Now I'm going to demonstrate scaling. So we're going to go and create ourselves another rectangle or square shape inside of here. Go into edit, and as you're probably guessing, scaling is just going to scale the shapes as we create new tiles. Create tiled clones, and there we are again. Let this be set to simple translation. Click on scale. And in this situation, what we're going to do with our square we have here is as we draw new squares on the screen, we're going to decrease their size. So change that to negative 15, change that to negative 15. Of course, we could randomize these. We could also alternate the signs on these from tile to tile and also accumulate them. And then we're messing around with columns in this situation. So let's come in here and set this to 1 and set this to 4 and hit create. And there you can see as they're drawing new tiles, we are decreasing by 15% each new tile that goes on the screen. And as you're probably guessing, there's numerous different ways to play around with scaling, and I'm going to show more interesting things we can do here in a second after I cover all the basics of using these tools. Come in here and reset this, close that, delete all these things, and this time we're going to draw ourselves a triangle. Up inside here, change this to 3, and there is our triangle. Now to demonstrate rotation, this should work pretty well. Edit, clone, create tiled clones, go into rotation, and as you're guessing, as new tiles are being drawn, they're also going to be rotated. So let's just let this guy here, meaning rows, be set to 1, and let's change the columns to 7, because I want them to be drawn as columns from left to right, and I don't want them to be going from the top to the bottom. That's how we are looking at rows and columns. We can come in here now, since we're using the columns and we want to rotate them. Let's say we want to rotate them 20 degrees. Hit create, and you can see that's exactly what they're doing. So as they're rotating across the screen, they are starting off flat like this and rotating bit by bit by bit until they go back to their original position. So there you go. Another thing we can do is, let's draw a star in this situation. This is something maybe a little bit more interesting than what we've done. Come in here, select star, do this inside of there, increase this to 5, go get the select tool, get this guy right here, and there we go. Now we have our star shape on there. We could also come in here, and if we zoom in, you're going to see the center point for our star right here. Let's say we move it outside of the actual shape itself. Then let's come in here and actually play around with the clone and the tiles and the rotation tab specifically. We could then come into shift and say, hey, don't pay any attention to the height and the width of this star, and then jump back over into rotation, change the per column degree rotation to 60 and let per row be 0. Hit create, and there you can see you basically stacked all these guys and revolved all these stars around the changed center point for the star. Something else that's a little bit more interesting, again, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to reset all these different guys so that I don't have any problems or get confused by anything I did in the past. Close that. Let's say that you would want to come in here and create for yourself like a flower pattern. Let's draw ourselves an ellipse here on our screen. There it is, nice and simple. Again, open up our clone tiling. There it is. If you want to rotate this guy around to create like a flower pattern, like we said before, well, we're mainly going to be messing around with our columns. So let's say we want to have 12 petals, and we're not going to do anything with anything else, so let's just leave that be set as 1. Go into rotate, and remember we have a bunch of columns here, and we have 1 row. So we're going to be focusing in on our columns, and we're going to set this to say 15 degrees. And then in our shift, with each new one that is going to be drawn, if we want everything to be shifted around all on the same dot, what we can do is for Shift X per column, we'll set that to negative 100%, and then Shift Y, we'll also set that to negative 100%, and hit create, and there you can see there's your flower type pattern. Could also just do something quite interesting with just a simple line. Oh, delete that. Come in here, Bezier tool, bonk and bonk, and we'll see how this lines up here or what it looks like. Okay, got that set. Again, jump into our clone tiling. In this situation, what I'm going to do is make pretty much the same type of flower thing, but it's going to look a little bit more interesting. Let's set our rows to 8 and our columns to 10. Jump into Shift again, negative 100 per column, negative 100 per row. Again, we want all of these rotations to be done in the center, and then jump over into rotation, and let's change this to 2 degrees per row and 18 degrees per column. Make sure it's not 15, 18, that'll cause catastrophe. Okay, got that set, and hit create. And there you can see is another interesting type of pattern. So I'm basically just jumping through all of these different things. Let's change it a little bit. Well, I don't know, change this to, well, let's change this one. Let's change the row here to 10, hit create, and you can see how it's moving together. Or you could change this to say 4 and hit create, and you can see how the spacing is changing as those rotations are occurring on our screen. And that brings us to blur and opacity, and for this guy I'm just going to use a simple rectangle, just like before. Again, clone, create clones, Here it is, blur and opacity. Blur, as you're probably guessing, is going to blur the different objects as they're being drawn across the screen. So let's just come in here and change this to 1. We want this to go across the x-axis. Let's just change this to 6. I don't know. And then let's change the blur percentage. Let's just put 1 inside of there. Hit create. There you go. There's a 1% blur each time a new tile is being drawn, but you can't see that because it's too slight. So let's change it instead to 10%. Create. And there you can see it just blurs as each new tile comes on the screen. Change that back to 0. Not going to be using that. Then we get into fade out. Let's try changing this to 10. Hit create. And there you can see as the rectangles are being drawn on the screen, they're slowly fading away. And in actuality, if you want them to pretty much fade almost completely away, change that to 16, hit create, and you can see it's a little bit more dramatic there on our screen. So as you would probably guess, the way you think blur and opacity changes would, actually show up on the screen, that's exactly what happens. So let's set that to reset. And that brings us to color, the color tab. It does some pretty interesting things. One thing you're going to have to do, however, if you want to mess around with this, is you're going to have to mess around with initial color. So let's get rid of that, and you're going to have to also change the fills. So if I want to change the color or hue, the lightness, and so forth as new tiles are being drawn across the screen, I'm just going to select this. However, what I'm going to have to do is go in for the stroke and the fill and set this to what is called unset paint. So unset paint for both of those guys. Then jump back into it again, clone, tiled clones, jump over into color specifically. Then what you have to do is define an initial color, and in this situation it's red. So let's just say that's what I want, or I can change it to whatever I want. Let's change it to green just to be different, and then say okay. Now your initial color is green, and if I want to change my hue as it goes across, negative 16 normally works pretty good. So I'm going to go like this, negative 16, and also change this to negative 16. Of course you could randomize. I almost never randomize though. Saturation doesn't really matter. Let's just change that to negative 16 as well. Negative 16, and then our lightness, let's say that we want this to be, let's change this to the negative 5. And since we're only messing around with columns, let's just let this be 0. And let's just play around and see what happens. Okay, so hit create, and there you can see Starts off at green, goes to brown, goes to magenta, purple, blue, and navy blue. So it's basically just generating for us a rainbow type pattern. You could, of course, come in here, change this to 6, create, and you're going to be able to create even more interesting types of transitions from one color to another. And really, you should go in here and play around with this because it's just kind of interesting to see exactly what's generated. You could also come in here, change this to 0, change this to 0, change this to 0, and then change this to -16, and this one to -16, and hit create. And you can see that it is going from whatever our initial color is and slowly getting rid of the saturation in that color as it goes across. So really interesting sort of effects that you can get with this color tab, and really interesting effects you can get in general. Come in here and delete all that, and let's do something a little bit more interesting. Let's say that you would want to have a star pattern, or pretty much anything, and you wanted it to sort of spiral from being very, very small to being quite large. This might crash my computer, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. Come over here to the Spyro tool, and let's create it. I want to get rid of the fill, so there, that went away. Give it a stroke just to see exactly what it looks like, and I want to keep this guy quite simple. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a star. There's my star, and I'm going to draw a star in here pretty small. Change to the selection tool, and there that is. Now basically what I'm going to want to do here is I want to take this star that is way inside of there, if you can't see it, and have it spiral outwards, and at the same time scale, and then at the same time also change color. Sounds really, really complicated, but it isn't with this tool. But you have to follow a couple rules. The spiral that you have inside of here is going to have no fill, of course. So come in here, make sure that's set for no fill. And it's also going to have no paint stroke. So go into stroke paint and X that out. So the stroke is there, but you can't see it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to select the star, and we have to make sure that it also has our fill set to unset. So this guy right here, because we want this to be the thing that changes colors as additional stars are being drawn on the screen. So if that's going to be a thing that is going to be changing, we're going to have that be there. And you can see it's black. It's not really black, but that's what it looks like on the screen. And we'll leave pretty much everything else exactly the same. We want to, of course, come in here because we want these to be working together. Select them all. Control G. They are both grouped. Then we're going to go Edit and Clone and create tiled clones. There we go. We're going to have this be set to P1. Very simple translation. And in this situation, we're going to have 2 rows and 20 columns. And I've done this ahead of time, of course. Because I want the rotation to go around the same center point, I'm going to go into Shift. Per column, I'm going to set this to -100. Shift Y, -100. I want to scale these as the stars are being drawn on the screen as well as being spiraled. So for column, I'm going to change this to 30. And then I'm also going to do the same thing for Y. Go into rotation. Going to change the rotation for the rows to 30, and I want to change the rotation for the columns to 60. And of course you can rotate anything, you don't have to just use stars. And then if I also want to change my color, let's just let this be green, don't really care. Now actually let's come in here and let's make it a little bit different color. Move that down there, let's move this up here, and now it's sort of a red type of color. Looks a little bit nicer. Now let's also come in here and change that. Okay, so now it's a red, so it looks a little bit more interesting. And then I'm going to be changing the hue. I'm not going to be paying attention to anything else, so let's just come in here and hit reset. And then change the hue for this guy, 10% and 10%. And zoom out and see what happens. And there you can see the star pattern starts off small, and as it is being spiraled around, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Then the final thing we have here, and I'm going to do this really quickly, is trace, because trace is really, really strange. So basically what trace does is it sets the tile's color, the size, the opacity, etc. based off of the image that is under it. So let's come in here and delete all those, and I actually have a rainbow gradient that I created earlier. Okay, so here's the rainbow gradient. I'm going to do this really quickly. Come in here. This is the guy we're going to be changing. This is the rectangle that's going to be drawn across this image, and then it's going to be affected by the changes in colors and so forth of the image that is underneath. So clone, create tiled clones. There we go. Come into trace. I'll go over this here real quick. Of course, you're going to have to go trace the drawing under the tiles. Then what you're going to do in this first part here, let me zoom in a little bit. In pick from drawing, what you're going to do here is you're going to specify the property of the image that is underneath of the object you have selected that will affect the tiles. So it's either going to be the color, red, green, blue, hue, saturation, lightness, or the opacity. Down here, you're going to be able to edit the gamma, and you're going to use that to try to correct color distortions that might occur. And then, of course, you can randomize, just like always. And then finally, what you're going to do down here is define how the input will affect the tiles that are going to be drawn. And presence, if you've never heard of that before, it's an Inkscape specific sort of thing. Presence is the probability that a tile will not display at all. So let's just do something really simple. Let's just have color set, and there you go. And then let's set this to 20 as well, and then let's hit create. And there you can see all the tiles that were generated were all based off of the color. And you can change this to opacity, hit create, and you're going to get all sorts of different results. I personally don't really use the trace tool, but hey, it gives you a new thing that you can explore artistically, so you might find it very, very useful. So that is an overview of clones inside of Inkscape, as well as clone tiling. Go in, experiment with it, and have a lot of fun. Please leave any questions or comments below. Otherwise, till next time.